go all out for just a big name. Would be kind of interesting to see if they go down that route.
Okay, I wondered if they might take them across to play in Chicago or somewhere. But let's.
I don't. That's not out of the question. I mean, I think that would probably, given that the World Cup, Rugby League World Cup, is being held in the States in 2025. I would say that's probably got a bit to do with it.
Okay.
And the Warriors will be playing some games, probably on the East Coast, maybe in Hawaii as well.
Okay, moving on to
West Coast. Sorry.
Moving on to cricket, sure. And a question for all three of you, really. A thesis from the ABC's website in Australia this morning that Cricket Australia's forthcoming investigation into team culture, for all the reasons we know about, presents a chance to banish bullying, blokey behaviour from the game. Are we somehow seeing, do you think, the end of mongrel in blokey sports? Is the whole mood changing here or not so much? What do all of you think?
I don't think it is going to see the end of, shall we call it the sledging culture in cricket? There's a difference between what they did, which is cheating, and the fairly macho sledging, winding the other team up, etc. I think Richie McCaw, who just spoke to some school kids about this, had it right though. He said, you never want to have it so you can't go into the other side's changing room after the match and have a beer with them and shake their hands, etc. So within that constraint, I think, I'd hate to actually see cricket ever lose some of that sledging humour that it has.
Okay. Ali?
I've got nothing more to add to that. I totally agree with what David said.
Very good. Jamie?
I would agree with that sentiment. However, I do feel it is kind of moving away from that sort of thing. And all you really need to see for proof of that is our own team, the Black Caps. One of the things that's come out after the sledging and the cheating debacle is that a lot of people are saying, the Australians should be playing more like the New Zealanders because they play it in a good spirit and play it in the right way. Whether that just means that the Black Caps are actually just better at getting away with it remains to be seen. But I think that it just shows that top cricket players in this country, at least, know they can't really get away with behaving the way that the Australians did. And I think that maybe them being taken down a peg at least will, if not change their behaviour, will at least give other teams ammunition to, alpha them out even more so than the South Africans have just done, because they just won that game by almost 500 runs.
The Fijian Rugby Sevens coach is now on the nation's 50-cent coin as they go into the Gold Coast games as favourites, and he's doing something right. He told the Telegraph, it's so common in rugby, people take the mickey and think they're being friendly, but really it's a form of bullying and it makes people the butt of the joke for the benefit of everybody else. He insists players be positive about each other. So it can be done. It can be done, Jamie.
Yes, absolutely it can be done. And just a little I'll add to that. He's not just on the 50-cent piece. They have a $7 note that they specially commissioned. That he's on as well, which I've seen. It's a real thing, and it looks very nice. Anyway, sorry.
That's all right.
I think that an Englishman saying that is probably just more about the way he grew up playing rugby and the sort of upper class environment that they have.
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah. Okay, look, thank you, Jamie. Sorry about being out of time. But the music is playing. David Farrer, lovely to have your company on the panel. Thank you very much. And Ali Jones, of course, same to you.
Great to be here, thank you.
We are back tomorrow, and Checkpoint is coming right up.
Ko te mairai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Tonight, documents released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act reveal EQC has already spent $100 million more on botched repairs than what was estimated to be the overall cost, and the figure is rising, although no one, not even the Minister herself, knows what the ceiling will be. However, EQC Minister Megan Woods says the previous National Government has failed Christchurch.
Well, I think it's a failure of political management. The minister's responses, the previous minister, Gerry Brownlee, back in 2016, was to not take this seriously. It was willfully downplaying it and making light of it.
The cost of re-repairing Christchurch coming up next on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission has accused the previous government of willfully ignoring the scale of botched and inadequate repairs of damaged Canterbury homes. Checkpoint has obtained information showing the actual cost to the Commission of fixing repairs in Christchurch as more than double the $70 million previously made public. Re-repairs involve work done under EQC where the initial repairs were inadequate, incomplete or faulty. The Minister, Megan Woods, has told Checkpoint that when she was an opposition MP, she feared the problem was worse than the country was being told.
It gives me absolutely no sense of delight to be proved right here. But everything that I suspected was happening in terms of the volume that was awaiting and just around the corner was there, and I think the previous government needs to take full responsibility for that.
Megan Woods. Checkpoint will have more from the Minister and the actual cost of the re-repairs to date after this bulletin. The National Party is hitting back at a suggestion it was slow to act over the recall of faulty airbags. The government has announced a compulsory recall of 50,000 vehicles fitted with Alpha-type Takata bags. Owners have been given until the end of 2019 to have the bags replaced. Around the world, 23 people have been killed when the bags misdeployed, sometimes spraying car occupants with metal. A voluntary recall began in 2013, but the Consumer Affairs Minister Chris Farfoy says the previous government did not take the problem seriously enough. Nationals leader Simon Bridges denies that.
Definitely not. It was always a safety first approach, but the best evidence and advice was to start voluntarily and to ratchet it up systematically, and that's what we've done, and I suspect that's why the government now is in the position of, having worked through that, got to a, as I say, more mandatory and more compulsory position.
National Party leader Simon Bridges. Auckland courier drivers fear being squeezed out of work if a proposed double down on fuel tax in Auckland goes ahead. On top of the regional fuel tax due to take effect in July, the government is now looking at increasing the national fuel tax by up to 14 cents a litre. Laura Tupou reports.
With the combined taxes, Aucklanders could be paying up to 26 cents a litre more at the pump as early as next year. The operations manager of Speedy Couriers, Shannon Berridge, says most drivers are contractors and the work isn't high paying. He says many support large families and live week to week, and having to pay a lot more for petrol will hit them where it hurts. Mr Berridge says that will no doubt force some to look for other work. Ko Laura Tupou aho.
Workers earning the living wage will get a financial boost from today. The unofficial voluntary wage, introduced in 2013, has gone up from $20.20 an hour to $20.55. The national convener of Living Wage Aotearoa, Annie Newman, says the higher rate has been calculated after a review that took into account health and transport costs. The minimum wage was raised 3 days ago to $16.50 an hour. An Auckland man who poisoned 9 of his colleagues with a Christmas cake spiked with cannabis will seek a sentence of home detention. In the North Shore District Court today, Graham Jones's sentencing was delayed because his proposed address for a possible home detention sentence hadn't been checked by the probation service. Edward Gay reports.
Describing this as the first case of its kind, Judge Aljit Singh said Jones could have caused considerable harm because the people affected by the cannabis were working with machinery. According to the police summary of facts, the 58-year-old baked the cake with cannabis and brought it to the car wreckers where he worked, hidden under clothing. He left the cake in the kitchen and 9 of his co-workers ate it. One believed they were having a heart attack and he and others were taken to hospital. Jones will be sentenced in July. I Tamaki Makoto ko Edward Gay aho.
The site of Dunedin's hospital rebuild won't be known until later this month. An announcement had been expected this week, but Cabinet has delayed its decision while it gives further consideration to the project's business planning. Speculation is rife the site will be that of the Cadbury factory, which ceased production last month. It's 5:04. Swimmers getting tangled in lane ropes are set to be a common sight at the Commonwealth Games, where the outdoor pool is expected to cause problems for backstrokers. They usually train indoors with a roof guiding them to swim straight. but not so at the outdoor Gold Coast Aquatic Centre. Corey Mayne will compete in the 100 metres and 200 metres backstroke for New Zealand, and having reached the finals at the World Champs last year, he's a strong medal chance. Despite having trained in an open pool in Noosa for the past week, Mayne admits it's taking some getting used to.
The sun's pretty bright here. Early mornings are about the same as night, so you kind of prepare for it and you get used to it. I always crash, so I mean you kind of get used to it.
Corey Mayne. The games open at 10 tonight and the swimming begins tomorrow. Tiger Woods hasn't competed at the US Masters since 2015, but that hasn't stopped him from warning his rivals ahead of this week's tournament. Woods, who has missed 3 of the last 4 Masters because of back problems, calls himself a walking miracle and says he's feeling the best he has in 7 or 8 years.
I feel great. I feel like I've really put a lot of the pieces together. We've worked on what body parts to get stronger, what body parts need to be more limber. I feel fantastic. It's just a matter of now going out there and competing and playing and posting numbers.
Tiger Woods. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, backed by popular demand, more on weeds of Colin Merck from Manaki Whenua, Landcare Research, identifying your photos of weeds so you know which ones you can coexist with and which ones you need to rip out. So send your weed shots to nights@radionz.co.nz. The sooner the better so we can get them to Colin. Then listen in after the news at 7.
And on Lately at 10 we feature words, pronunciation, etymology and linguistics. We'll also have an eye on books, music, people and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. Waitomo to Manawatu, also the Central High Country, isolated showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine, but areas of cloud later tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, including Wairarapa, fine, but some cloudy periods and possibly a shower or two in the Wairarapa. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine. However, cloudy periods about the Canterbury Plains and Kaikoura coast tomorrow morning with isolated showers. Buller and Westland, occasional showers clearing overnight. Fiordland, occasional rain, possibly heavy tomorrow night. Otago and Southland, scattered rain, retreating to the south coast tomorrow morning and to Stewart Island during the afternoon. Westerly gales easing this afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the chance of a shower until the morning. RNZ National, it's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas, thank you very much indeed, Anna, and thank you everyone for being with us. We begin Checkpoint with the figure of $160 million. Checkpoint can tonight reveal that is what so far has been spent on re-repairs to homes damaged in the Canterbury earthquakes. $160 million. That's not repair work, that's repair work on the repair work. $160 million of public money so far. That figure is more than double the overall estimate Gerry Brownlee gave to Parliament less than 2 years ago.
As for the cost of the second-time repairs, it's estimated that they will be in the vicinity of some $60 to $70 million overall.
22 months on, an overall figure of $60 to $70 million has become a so far figure of $160 million, an increase of 120% with more to come. And Checkpoint can also reveal that figure does not include cash settlements, increasingly common in Christchurch in the past 2 years. We obtained this material under the Official Information Act. I spoke to EQC Minister Megan Woods earlier this afternoon.
I think one of the things that was really evident to me back there, that the previous national government were willfully ignoring the scale of the problem in front of them, and the fact that they couldn't see the fact that they needed to scale up and have more staff and do things differently was really evident back then. And I think the numbers that we're seeing that have had to be spent on these repairs are testament to that now.
I have an EQC document from September 2016 released to us under the Official Information Act. It estimates, and I quote, that 16.3% of all homes, all work completed under the Canterbury Home Repair Programme has had callbacks associated with it.
That's right, and I think this was evident back in 2016. It was actually evident way before then, John, that there were problems emerging with the problem. We could have actually got people back on with their lives if the previous government had been willing to face the scale of this problem and actually scale up the organisation to deal with it then. And we need to make sure that we've got the systems right, because each one of these, whether it's one or if it's 10,000, is a life that isn't back on track in the way that it should be. So one of the things that I've done since I've become minister is ask for a claims management process to be put in place, so people aren't pushed from pillar to post when they have to come back and ask for their house to be re-repaired, which, face it, can be pretty soul destroying. You think your house is fixed, then you've got to come back and have a second bite of it. So one of the things that I've asked is have the organisation ready for these claims when they do come back in, and that is a change that has been made in recent weeks.
And you talk about claims coming back in future tense. What are the projections? So $160 million of re-repairs is work to date. What are the projections about what is yet to come?
Well, that's something I'm still getting clarity around, John, and something that I'm obviously actively interested in as the responsible minister, that this is something that the Crown has liability for, and we need to ensure that we have the resources in place so that people's homes can be fixed. But from a Crown perspective, we also need to know what the impact on the books is going to be.
So EQC have not been able to tell you what their projections are for...
Some of the work that we're working through, and that Christine Stevenson, who's my independent ministerial advisor, she's doing some really good work in there. And of course the board under the new chairwomanship of the interim chair, Dame Annette King, are working constructively about getting me some of that information.
Can we talk about cash settlements? The figure of $160 million, so that is repairs on repairs. Does that include cash settlements?
No, and that's the point I made first up, that 160 is just the managed repairs. So that's when either EQR or EQC has facilitated someone going back in and doing the work to repair your home. It doesn't include the people that have taken the cash settlement and then have gone and contracted a builder separately. And I've asked EQC to get me some clarity around that number urgently.
So we have a figure of $160 million, and that is just managed repairs. We have an unknown amount of cash paid out over and above that, and we have repairs that have yet to be remediated, which aren't even in the books. What is the full and final figure going to be, do you think?
Well, look, I'm not prepared to take a guess at it, but one of the things that does frustrate me is that some of these repairs have got worse because they weren't dealt with quickly. That obviously time can make things that are broken a bit more broken. So that is something that frustrates me a lot, and something that I have asked EQC to get me the clarity around. What is it we could be looking at? There will be some speculation around that, but we need to at least have a ballpark of what it is that is sitting out there and needing re-repair.
Why don't we have that 7 years after the earthquakes? Why don't we have those figures?
Well, that's precisely the question I asked, and precisely the reason I appointed an independent ministerial advisor.
You talk about a failure of leadership or of management. Who has failed?
Well, I think it's a failure of political management, I think, and leadership. That the minister's responses, the previous minister Gerry Brownlee back in 2016, was to not take this seriously. It was willfully downplaying it and making light of it in some ways. And I didn't think it was acceptable then. And I knew there was a bigger problem when I was the opposition spokesperson, and it gives me absolutely no sense of delight to be proved right here. But everything that I suspected was happening in terms of the volume that was awaiting and just around the corner was there, and I think the previous government needs to take full responsibility for that.
Okay, the minister's failed. If I look at the EQC paperwork, it seems to me to be full of equivocation, and I just wonder, where was the leadership from the organisation called in fact the Earthquake Commission, whose job was to get it right? Was there a failure from the ground up?
Well, one of the things I'm interested in as the new minister is making sure that what we have is an organisation that's capable of fixing it now. Sid Miller, the new CEO, has been there for a year. So this is something that predated him. A number of the executive team are new and weren't there at this time. I think the most important thing, John, now is that we do get in place the structures that we need to get this right and to get people's homes fixed so they can get on with their lives.
Look, I absolutely agree with you. Sid Miller has only been there for just over a year, and this does all predate him. But what we're hearing once again is a reluctance or an inability to confront the extent of the problem. You, the Minister, don't know how much has been paid out in cash settlements. Now, if Sid Miller is the culture change agent that you describe him as, why haven't you been told the tough stuff?
Well, what I've said to you, John, is that I've asked my independent ministerial advisor. This is exactly the reason why.
But why do you have to ask? Sorry to interrupt, but we keep being referred to the new CEO of EQC. Why do you have to ask your independent ministerial advisor? Why has EQC not told their minister, not told the government, not told the taxpayer, and not told the people of Christchurch the actual extent of this issue?
Oh, look, I'm not making excuses for them here, John, and I haven't actually gone to my independent ministerial advisor to ask for the number. I've gone to the management of EQC. What I'm saying is I've asked my independent ministerial advisor to look at the reasons why I'm not getting this information. I don't think it's a willful keeping of those numbers from me. I think it's as simple as the systems weren't in place to adequately track this. And that's something that the ministerial advisor is well aware of and will be coming through with some of the recommendations when she reports to me at the end of April.
If you are an EQC client going through a remediation process and you are listening to the minister say, I don't know the extent of it, I can't get the information, you know, what is the message for the homeowner on the ground in Canterbury still struggling to get some resolution 7 years and some weeks on?
Well, that's a good question, John. I think that the key message is I will have that number. I've told EQC I expect that number, and that I need it in order to do my job, and that is coming. That wasn't included in the OIA that was sent to you. I actually asked whether that included cash settlement as well as managed repair, because I think that's a really important distinction to draw. Because as you identified, that since 2016 there has been an emphasis on getting people to accept a cheque rather than have someone to go in and repair their home. I think the key message, if you're one of these people who's discovered their home has to go through this yet again and be re-repaired, is that this government is taking it seriously. We're making the changes that are required at EQC to make it an organisation that is capable of fixing your home, and that we stand by the responsibility that your home needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed right.
Minister, you used the word emphasis on cash repairs, and we've got the documents, and that's my sense too, that there has been an emphasis on cash repairs, which means that we don't actually know the extent of the cost of re-repairs because, as you have told us, we don't know how much cash has been paid out. But cash gets people off the books. And also cash means that we don't subsequently have any insight into the process of how difficult it was to get the failed repairs, the botched repairs, repaired. Do you think EQC has been driving cash repairs for convenience to mitigate, mask and conceal the actual extent of the problem?
Look, for some people they did prefer to take a cheque and organise it themselves. Certainly the second time around, I think that they had more faith in and wanted to be in control of the process to organise that repair themselves. But look, as a local constituent MP who's been working on the ground for 6 years in Christchurch, I do know that some people did feel pressure to take cash settlements, and it's something that I talked about as the opposition spokesperson, and my colleagues have talked about also in terms of the experience of being constituent MPs, and that we know it's a matter of fact that there was a winding back of the managed repair programs.
Minister, have you been left a mess here? Are we?
Oh, look, absolutely. Absolutely. The previous government has left an absolute mess in regard to EQC in Christchurch and in Canterbury. It is something that we are determined to fix. I'm not prepared to perpetuate the problems that we've seen in the past. I'm making the changes that are required. It's simply not good enough for me that people were left unable to get on with their lives, and I'm not going to sit by and let that happen.
Megan Woods, we wanted to speak to the former Earthquake Recovery Minister, Gerry Brownlee. He has not accepted a single request for an interview on Checkpoint in the past 2 years, and we have made many. Because we knew this material would be coming under the Official Information Act, we formally approached him again. Last Thursday, we requested an interview on the cost of re-repairs. We put in 2 more requests yesterday and another request this morning. We received no response to any of those requests. So after we interviewed the Minister and given what she had been saying, we phoned Mr Brownlee.
Hello?
Mr. Brownlee, it's John Campbell from Radio New Zealand. Hello. I am recording this conversation. I just want to ask you, when you knew the cost of remediation of homes repaired under the Canterbury Home Repair Program had grown to as much as $160 million?
I don't recall.
You told the House in June 2016 that the overall cost of re-repairs was between $60 and $70 million?
John,
yep.
This is a completely unacceptable way for you to behave. You know that.
No, I don't actually. I've asked you repeatedly for interviews. We've asked you repeatedly for interviews.
Yes, I know,
you were the minister throughout this entire time. This is in the public interest.
That's right. And the way you've just talked over the top of me is what you do in interviews, as well as make various assertions, which I find completely unreasonable, and that's why I won't be involved in any interview with you. So thank you for your call, but I'm not answering your questions this afternoon.
If I ask you a question, and that was Gerry Brownlee, who was the previous Earthquake Recovery Minister. We also asked National leader Simon Bridges for an interview yesterday and today. He declined. National's new spokesperson for Earthquake Recovery is Stuart Smith. He was only elected to Parliament in 2014 and wasn't in Cabinet during his one term in government, but he told us he'd been briefed by Mr Brownlee yesterday. We'll hear from him and some of the homeowners currently dealing with botched repairs after 6 tonight. EQC boss Sid Miller was overseas today and unavailable. We hope to talk to him tomorrow. It's 21 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Car suppliers need to replace Alpha-type Takata airbags in 50,000 vehicles or face a penalty of up to $600,000. The government has today issued a compulsory recall of the airbags, which have a high risk of misdeploying in an accident, firing shrapnel into drivers and passengers. The deadline is December of next year, but the motor industry says getting all the parts before then could be a challenge. And Marie May has the story.
With more than 450,000 vehicles known to be affected by alpha and non-alpha airbags in New Zealand, a voluntary recall began in 2013. Around 29,000 alpha-type airbags have been replaced so far, but 50,000 remain. The Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Chris Farfoy, says he's prioritising the alpha-type bags because they're at greater risk of exploding. He says when Australia ordered a mandatory recall last month, he was surprised to find the government had no information about the scale of the problem here.
In summary, we have inherited a situation where 307,000 vehicles are still on the road in New Zealand being used by everyday families where safety risk, known to the previous government since 2013, has not been sufficiently addressed. We cannot allow this to go unaddressed.
Chris Farfoy says about 250,000 non-alpha airbags also need replacing, but that hasn't been made compulsory. The airbags have killed 23 people and seriously injured 200 overseas, but Mr Farfoy says official advice is that's mostly a risk in humid countries with extreme temperatures. The motor industry is backing the compulsory recall, with Motor Industry Association Chief David Crawford saying the scale of it is unprecedented in New Zealand. He says his organisation has been working on replacing the airbags for several years, but received little help from the previous government.
It was difficult to raise awareness of the challenges that we faced due to the scale. It just wasn't coming up to senior management within the NZTA or to ministers. And when Australia went mandatory, Minister Farfoy became interested and asked for a report, and since then we have seen significant progress with officials in terms of getting to the scale and the size of this.
David Crawford admits there could be a challenge in obtaining replacement parts given the scale of the problem, and also in finding sufficient technicians to do the work.
It takes between 30 minutes and 2 hours depending on the car to replace it. If we had all the parts now, it would take over a year of just doing the airbag replacement and no other servicing. That's how much resources are required to manage this.
Motor traders who do not comply with the compulsory recall face prosecution and the risk of a fine of up to $600,000, but Chris Farfoy says he hasn't yet considered whether vehicle owners who don't comply should be penalised.
I would send a rather clear message to them that they're putting their safety and the safety of their friends and family that drive with them at risk if they don't take the seriousness of this recall to heart and take their vehicle to get repaired.
Meanwhile, the opposition leader Simon Bridges denies that the previous government allowed hundreds of thousands of people to drive around in at-risk vehicles.
Definitely not. It was always a safety first approach, but the best evidence and advice was to start voluntarily and to ratchet it up systematically, and that's what we've done, and I suspect that's why the government now is in the position of, having worked through that, got to a, as I say, more mandatory and more compulsory position.
Further information on the recall will be available online, and the motor industry will contact those affected. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
25 minutes past 5. Let's change pace entirely. Tonight, New Zealand's Commonwealth Games team will be led into the opening ceremony on Australia's Gold Coast by a woman whose leg was amputated after an accident with a lawnmower when she was 2. Sophie Pascoe has won 15 Paralympic medals in the pool. She's a woman defined by what she's done, not what she lost. But that will never be more true than tonight, when she does something no Paralympic competitor has ever done before: lead out a New Zealand team of able-bodied stars. Over the years, we've had beautiful chats with Sophie's gran in Christchurch, Yvonne. Sophie goes and hangs out there. They have a roast together and a chat and put the world to rights. So we called Nana Yvonne again, but when we did so, we didn't know she was the one person Sophie had let in on her special secret.
So unexpected that a Paralympian is going to carry the flag. I don't know, I'm not too sure, but I think I heard it's the first time ever.
Yes.
Now, you know, how far can you go? I mean, Sophie has been, she has been plumbing for equality in sport. And also she's so inspirational to the young people of New Zealand, perhaps not only in New Zealand, perhaps abroad as well, because she's well known, isn't she, in other countries now.
She is.
And I think it's put New Zealand on the map as far as sport goes and Paralympics goes.
And also the message is such a powerful one, and over and above that, and this is one of the reasons we love talking to you so much, Yvonne, and why we always track you down in moments like these, is she still comes to visit her gran.
Oh, I thought you would track me down. I nearly went out to avoid you.
Well, I haven't turned up for a roast yet like Sophie does. She's still, this is magic, isn't it?
I know, you always... It is magic, it is. I just wish her grandfather was alive, I really do, because he would be so proud. I'm just hoping he's going to look down on her tonight, carrying that flag into the stadium. And I tell you what, every time I think about it and talk about it, it brings me near to tears. It really does. And her family are so proud. They had no idea what was going on yesterday. I knew the secret, and Joe rang me in the morning, and she said, Mum, she said, we've been asked New Zealand House, she said, we've been asked, she said, to go down there and be in for, like meeting the athletes and everybody and for the announcement. And she said, but she said, we haven't got tickets. She said, we haven't got tickets for the games, but she said, we're buying tickets. She said to look at them, to look at the opening on television. And I said, well, that'll be nice, won't it? I said, that'll be so good that you can do that, Joe. And she said, but I don't know whether Sophie's going to be there or not. And I said, well, actually, I said, I don't know whether she's going to be there either. I said, for the simple reason, we really don't know what she's going to be up to the next day. So I wouldn't know either, Joe, whether she's going to be there or not. Well, it was so hard to keep all this from them. I don't think I was very popular.
Hold on a sec.
Because they didn't have time to change when they got off the plane.
Wait a sec. So did Sophie tell you?
Sophie told me when she first found out, and she said, Nana, I want to tell you a secret. And it's got to be a secret, Nan, before we don't want the media to find out. I said, no, love. I said, you can trust me.
And so where will you be tonight? Where will you be watching tonight?
Well, I will be by the television. I think it starts here, doesn't it, at 10 o'clock. So I'll be sitting here right to the very end and wait for them all to come out. And I have a glass of wine in my hand to cheer them on.
Yvonne, it's beautiful to talk to you. Congratulations on your granddaughter, and congratulations on keeping the secret. Very well done indeed.
Thank you so much, John. And let me have an opportunity to wish the New Zealand team all the very, very best and good luck, and have an enjoyable games, because that's what they're there for, not just to compete, but to have a thoroughly enjoyable time with all the rest of the athletes of the Commonwealth. And best of luck to Sophie. Love you, darling.
Yvonne Goodman, who is Sophie Pascoe's beautiful, doting grandma, talking to us from Christchurch earlier this afternoon. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, an investigation is underway after a woman is banned from staying overnight in a shared ward with her sick husband. At Waikato Hospital, workers earning the living wage get a boost in our Commonwealth Games. Backstrokers express concerns about competing in an outdoor pool at the Gold Coast Aquatic Centre. No roof, the sun in your eyes, no sense of where the hell you are. More on that coming up. Nona next with business news, but before any of it, Anna Thomas with the headlines.
Thanks, John. The government has accused National of leaving EQC in a mess and willfully ignoring the scale of botched and inadequate repairs of damaged Canterbury homes. Checkpoint has obtained information showing the actual cost to the Commission of fixing repairs in Christchurch is more than double the $70 million previously made public. Repairs involve work done under EQC where the initial repairs were substandard. New Zealand workers earning the living wage will receive a financial boost from today. The wage, which is voluntary and introduced in 2013, has gone up 35 cents to $20.55. The national convener of Living Wage Aotearoa, Annie Newman, says the higher rate has been calculated after taking into account health and transport costs. The National Party is hitting back at a suggestion it was slow to act over the recall of faulty airbags. The government has announced a compulsory recall of 50,000 vehicles fitted with the Alpha-type Takata bags. A voluntary recall began in 2013, but the Consumer Affairs Minister Chris Whawhoi says the previous government did not take the problem seriously enough, but that's been denied by National's leader Simon Bridges. A manager at an Auckland courier company says its drivers will have to absorb the petrol price hike if the government's proposal for a national increase in fuel tax goes ahead. The national fuel tax would come on top of a regional one, which would mean Aucklanders could be paying up to 26 cents more per litre. Speedy Couriers says being a driver is not a high-paying job, and most drivers come from low socio-economic areas in South Auckland. A Taranaki hapu has erected a whare and occupied farmland near Tonga Porutu in protest at a Māori land court decision involving a disputed land sale dating almost 100 years. The court says the 36-hectare Te Kaufo block belongs to the hapu's neighbours, but Ngāti Wai say the sale was never completed. The hapu says this land was left to Kirene Wetine's sisters after he died in World War II, but neighbour Angela Potros says her family purchase of the land is legal. And those are the headlines.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Let's turn to business news with Nona Peltier, who is on the other side of me. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Consumer confidence remains high, but high household debt levels mean people are vulnerable to rises in interest rates, right?
That's right. So we're still at a really high level. Consumer confidence is high. They're buoyant. But there is this overhang in the market. So about, what, a third, more than a third, a net third of consumers think that they're better off now than they were before, and they think this is a year ago. And they're, what, 19% think that they're, 19% think they're actually better off than they were a year ago. But those numbers are also a little bit concerning because they're not paying attention to their debt levels. The confidence survey by ANZ suggested that household debt is running at around 167% of disposable income.
Right.
Well, that's excessive.
Which means that if interest rates go up,
that's right,
people are going to hurt.
Debt. They got a lot of debt they're carrying, and so that's going to be a problem for households if they continue to spend without paying down that debt if interest rates rise. And that's on the cards for sure. These days, anything can happen.
Yeah, sure can. Speaking of things that are on the cards, Napier Port, the Port of Napier, right?
Yeah.
What is its future? Because I know the Hawke's Bay Regional Council is considering that. What are the issues here and what are the options being considered?
Well, yeah, so they've decided, looking at their economic future, that really they've got their eggs all in one basket. They own the port, and that's about all they own. So it's vulnerable to risk, earthquake risk, all kinds of risk. And plus they need an additional investment.
A good port to have shares in because of the horticulture and agriculture that goes out of.
Yeah. But they don't have to own the whole thing. And so they say that they need $250 million of investment to bring the port up to the standard that would allow it to take advantage of economic growth. And that's a significant investment. And so they're saying, well, maybe we can list the port, maybe like float it on the market. Maybe we can just find an investor who wants to just buy the whole thing. There's a few options that they're looking at, but one thing they have to do is definitely raise the money, but also consider they really have to look at what they're doing there. No matter what they do, they want to diversify because it makes sense. Why have one asset? It doesn't really make sense for the regional council to hold on to that one asset when it's a significant one, and they certainly could do something with it. And why not?
Be fascinating to see what they decide. Any time frame on that, or is it just being discussed now? Options being considered?
Let's see. No, they're just, I guess they put a paper together right now, and I suppose with anything that's in government, who knows?
Yeah, we'd love your feedback on that if you're in the Bay.
Right.
2101, text us. What happened on the markets today, Nona?
Well, it's topsy-turvy, I'd say. It's really confusing. There's a simmering trade war between the United States and China. The markets are not sure which way to go. It's definitely mixed. Basically, investors don't know what to do. Strangely, even though the markets are a little changed, here in New Zealand, we moved up 0.8%, which was in line actually with Shanghai. So I guess the Chinese market's not too worried. Hong Kong was little change. Australia's little change. Shanghai up, New Zealand up about the same, so pretty buoyant. Don't know why exactly, because the rest of the market's unsure. We were up 0.8%, 68 points to 8,398, which is a fairly good hike. And the New Zealand dollar is also stronger, 72.9 US cents, 94.5 Australian, and 51.7 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the weather, as we do every night at this time, and we're joined by Mitsiv's meteorologist, John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. High pressure building across much of New Zealand as we go through in towards Thursday. Means for many of us that there's going to be a dry looking day. Up north there's just areas of cloud to start things off, but generally a fine looking story as we go through in towards the afternoon. Plenty of dry weather and top temperatures in Auckland of 23 degrees Celsius. There'll be a little bit more cloud down the western side of the North Island, but all in all, many spots are set to stay dry throughout the daytime, with temperatures widely up into the low 20s and just a bit more cloud from time to time. Generally a fine looking start today down in the capital. More cloud though arriving through the afternoon, but staying dry and highs in Wellington of 20 degrees Celsius. The best of the sunshine out on the eastern coast of places like Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Temperatures here though around about 21 to about 22 degrees Celsius, but all in all plenty of dry weather across much of the North Island. And it's a similar story down on the South Island as well. For many places, it's a fine dry day. Areas of cloud to start the day. In Christchurch, highs here 18 degrees Celsius, but generally staying dry throughout the daytime. And the best of the sunshine for the South Island up through Nelson and Marlborough. Plenty of sunshine here, and highs in Nelson of 21 degrees Celsius. Head down towards the south, you'll find some wetter weather in through Fiordland and perhaps a few showers making their way in towards Invercargill as well. But even through most of Southland and Otago, there's plenty of dry weather in store. And that's it from me.
Thanks, John. Lovely day on the South Island tomorrow, or much of it anyway. Workers earning the living wage are getting a financial boost today. The wage, which is voluntary and has been around since 2013, aims to give people a better quality of life. It's risen 35 cents an hour from $20.20 to $20.55. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
On an unusually sunny and calm April day in central Wellington, I meet Lara Denby, who's starting another shift at the Rogan Vagabond Bar, where she's been working for just over a year. She's being paid the living wage and says the extra few dollars an hour means she's enjoying life a lot more and not just living week to week on the minimum wage.
It's definitely made money stresses less of a thing. It's easier to pay my rent. I know that, when I go to the supermarket, I don't have to be buying all the cheapest things that I possibly can. Yeah, it's definitely made my life much more convenient and easier and, just less stressful.
Ms Denby can't imagine what it's like for families trying to live on a single income, earning the minimum wage. She says more businesses should get on board with the living wage.
100%, yeah. I don't see why people wouldn't. Of course, I understand what some people's hang-ups are about it, but they're irrelevant when it comes down to just basic human decency and giving people, you know, what they need to live.
Her boss, Gwilym Waldron, made the switch to paying the living wage to his employees a few months ago.
Wellington is expensive, and New Zealand in itself is expensive across the board for everything. I worked for years in Australia, and over there people earn more money and things are cheaper. You come to New Zealand, you know, people are struggling just to live, you know.
He says it makes economic and social sense to pay that extra amount.
I don't think there's any thought to be had into it. You just have to get on board and pay the living wage. They've got a concept of if staff are not earning the living wage, basically they're subsidising your business with their standard of living. And once you get that concept, you can't continue to pay under the living wage.
His business is one of around 100 that are accredited to pay the rate. The Living Wage National Convener Annie Newman says there are more than 600,000 workers who don't earn enough to survive and are living in poverty. She says today's higher rate has been calculated after a major review.
It takes into account the Household Economic Survey data from Stats New Zealand, and then it's added this year, which is a bit different, a number of other data sets that have become available, and that includes transport, health, and a couple of other things, so that it's really much more closely aligned to what workers need rather than just what they spend.
Today's rise follows an increase in the minimum wage of $16.50 an hour, which came into effect on April the 1st. But Annie Newman says the living wage is unlikely to be made compulsory.
The living wage is independent of government, so any compulsory regime would be introduced by government. I think that the significant increase that we've seen in the minimum wage is a sign that the government is recognising that the current minimums are too low, and that's a good sign because they are too low.
Back at the Rogan Vagabond, Lara Denby says she'll put any extra income she earns from today towards her OE. For Checkpoint, Jonathan Mitchell.
A woman shot and wounded 4 people at YouTube's headquarters in Northern California before turning the gun on herself. Workers at the large campus in San Bruno, south of San Francisco, reported shots being fired before people began running from the building in panic. The motive for the shooting is still unclear. Police say it was not terrorism related. The BBC's Russell Trott reports.
The home of one of the world's biggest social media channels, now itself the focus of world attention. Police responded to reports of an active shooter at YouTube headquarters at just after 12:45, as staff gathered for lunch in a patio area of the main building. Aerials of the scene in the city of San Bruno, south of San Francisco, show officers and security staff apparently frisking for weapons. No one certain of who's involved or how many, and no one taking any chances.
Upon arrival, officers encountered numerous employees fleeing from the building. It was very chaotic, as you can imagine. We did encounter one victim with an apparent gunshot wound towards the front of the business as we arrived. Several minutes later, while conducting a search of the premises, officers located a second individual with a gunshot wound that appears to may have been self-inflicted.
A man believed to be the woman shooter's boyfriend is in a critical condition. 2 other women were also shot before she turned the gun on herself.
We are an incredibly tight-knit community within YouTube, and it feels like a family. Today, it feels like the entire community of YouTube and all of the employees were victims of this crime. Our hearts go out to those who suffered in this particular attack, and our prayers are with them and their families.
The injured have been taken to nearby hospitals. It's not known whether the dead gunwoman was a YouTube employee.
Russell Trott reporting from California for the BBC. Swimmers getting tangled in lane ropes is set, we are told, to be a common sight at the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast. The outdoor pool is set to cause problems for backstrokers in particular. Backstrokers usually train indoors with a roof providing them a reference point to help them swim straight. Not so at the outdoor Gold Coast Aquatic Centre, and that's causing concern. As sports editor Stephen Hewson and visual journalist Claire Easton Farrelly report.
Corey Main will compete in the 100 and 200 metre backstroke for New Zealand, and despite having trained in an open pool in Noosa for the past week, he admits it's still taking some getting used to.
It's just preference and practice, I think, mostly, and if you've done a good preparation, I mean, we try and reduce the amount of times we swim into the lane route, but it's going to happen, so you've got to be ready for it.
So have you been able to get out and swim at night in the pool?
Yeah.
And how did you find that?
It's all right. I mean, early mornings are about the same as night, so you kind of prepare for it and you get used to it.
You didn't have too many crashes?
I always crash, so I mean, you kind of get used to it.
A roof would solve the problem, of course, but there's a simple reason why the pool here doesn't have one, according to Gold Coast Organising Committee Chief Executive Mark Peters.
It's open because we didn't want to spend tens of millions of dollars for 6 days. And we've run championships in there, and as the swimmers say, we get wet. So we're not worried about any of that. As you would know, track and fields, outdoors, lawn bowls, it's not an issue for the athletes.
It is an issue, however, for New Zealand paraswimmer Jesse Reynolds, and he's got the scars to prove it.
I've actually got a pretty decent mark on my finger from the lane rope already. We're doing a big max session in Noosa, like one of the first days we got there and went straight in. So no, it's been really interesting, a little bit painful, but that's all right.
So we could see swimming become a contact sport?
Potentially, yeah. In our competition that we had here in December, I pretty much tried to get into the other lane, so that was obviously not great for swimming, but it was pretty funny for everyone watching, so hopefully don't see that, but if you do, you're allowed to have a laugh.
It hasn't only been a problem for New Zealand swimmers. The Australians too have had problems. At a test swim at the pool last month, backstroke world champion Emily Seebohm and several other swimmers found themselves all at sea and getting tangled in the lane ropes too. The Australians, though, will have a definite advantage, says New Zealand paraswim coach Simon Main.
They've had it for years, they'll have grown up, learned to swim, and then they go into their mini squads and they go on. So yeah, they've definitely got an advantage for the backstroke.
The swimming competition at the Games begins tomorrow with Karina Doyle, the first of the New Zealanders to make a splash. She's in the 200 metre freestyle. On the Gold Coast for Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
Hone Harawira says the decision to stop a woman from staying with her terminally ill husband while being cared for at Waikato Hospital and threatening her with a trespass notice was racially motivated. Denise Perkins called Mr Harawira after being removed from her husband's shared hospital ward. The Waikato District Health Board says its policy is to not have family members stay in shared wards. But Hone Harawira says the lack of sympathy and cultural awareness is absolutely unacceptable. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter John Boynton has more.
It was the middle of last night when Hone Harawira received a call from Denise Perkins, whom he says was in tears after being barred from staying by her husband's side at Waikato Hospital. Mrs Perkins, who does contract work for the Waikato DHB, wanted to spend the night with her husband Kyle in a shared ward the night before his surgery for bowel cancer. She could not be reached for comment today, but Mr Harawira, who is a family friend, says she was told to leave.
I know she pleaded with them to ask could she be allowed to stay. Not only did they eventually say no, somebody turned up with some security guards and said, if you don't leave now, we're going to trespass you from here.
After talking to Mrs Perkins, Mr Harawira got in touch with staff at the hospital.
I spoke to the registered nurse in charge of the ward, who tried to fob it off like it wasn't an issue. She said, oh, no, she's in the lounge. I said, she's not in the lounge by choice. She's in there because you made her leave the ward.
A kaitiaki or health liaison for Māori whānau also tried to help Denise stay in her husband's ward, but was ignored.
For them to be so ignorant of tikanga Māori, speaks volumes for the racism which is inherent in that hospital.
But the Waikato District Health Board Interim Chief Executive Derek Wright says claims the incident was fuelled by racism are completely untrue. He apologised for the stress brought onto the patient's wife and says security guards were called because the situation became heated.
When you have a loved one in hospital, obviously it's a distressing time for you, and I think potentially this could have been handled differently, I think, from both ends, from both their end and from our end.
Derek Wright says hospital staff are under immense pressure and ward space is at a premium. The woman's husband was moved from a single ward to a shared ward because another patient needed a single room to be in isolation.
It wouldn't normally be our policy to have families staying overnight in a 4-bedded room, although I'm not saying it's never happened. It becomes a logistical issue.
Derek Wright says the chief executive of Te Puna Oranga has met with the family over concerns, and Carl has been moved back to a single room.
And we really appreciate that, he wants his wife there to look after him and provide some of his personal cares. We really appreciate that. We really appreciate when whānau family actually come and assist.
Hone Harawira says someone needs to be held accountable for the incident.
There needs to be somebody stepping out and making a very clear statement that this is unacceptable practice and somebody should pay for it.
Derek Wright has encouraged Denise Perkins to make a formal complaint so an investigation into the incident can begin.
And once we've investigated, once we've talked to the staff, once we've talked to the relatives, once we've actually looked at what's happened, we'll then look at what changes we might need to make as well.
No time frame was given by Derek Wright on how long the investigation might take. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
10 to 6. Donald Trump says he will deploy the US military to the border with Mexico until his, quote, beautiful wall is finally built. The president has become increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress on his signature campaign promise. And today at the White House, he revealed the US National Guard will soon become a bolstered border police force. But his latest comments immediately raised questions in Washington among legal experts about troop deployments on US soil, as federal law restricts using the Army for civilian law on US soil unless specifically authorised by Congress. The BBC's Anthony Zerker has the details.
Donald Trump didn't provide any details about how many or what types of U.S. military forces he planned to dispatch to the U.S. border or when they might arrive.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. That's a big step. We really haven't done that before, or certainly not very much before.
In 2006, President George W. Bush ordered 6,000 members of the U.S. National Guard, state-financed troops, to the Mexican border. In 2010, President Barack Obama sent 1,200. Mr. Trump said that he would meet with Defense Secretary James Mattis to work out details of the deployment. Under U.S. law, members of the military cannot be involved in domestic law enforcement, so any soldiers Mr. Trump sends to the border can only provide surveillance, training, or other support duties, or help with construction projects. The president's comments come after days of tweeting and remarks about immigration and border protection, in which he has tried to frame the issue as one of national security. Although the U.S. Congress recently allocated $1.6 billion for border security, the funds are much less than Mr. Trump has requested and can only be used for improvements on existing structures.
Anthony Zerker in Washington. Let's go from Washington to Taranaki, as you do, where a Taranaki hapu has erected a whare, an occupied farmland near Tonga Porutu, in protest at a Māori land court decision involving a disputed land sale dating back nearly 100 years. The court says the 36-hectare Te Kahwo block belongs to the hapu's neighbours, but Ngāti Wai says the sale of the land was never completed. Looking at this and trying to work out what's going on, here's our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin.
Haumoana White vividly remembers the day his neighbour, Angela Potros, announced she now owned a chunk of what he considers his ancestral land in northern Taranaki.
Mrs. Potros knocks on the door. It was a stormy day, I remember that. And she says, Rodney, you need to get your stock off that property. We now own it. And I says, I don't think so. And she pulled out this computer title, and it said it wasn't a full title. And I said to her, well, that's not a title. And she says, oh, well, we're waiting for the full title to come through.
Mr. White says his uncle, Karini Wetney, did try to sell the land in the 1920s and again in the 1930s, but the sale didn't go through and the family was never paid for it. A member of the Maori battalion, Mr. Wetney was killed in action in Tunisia during World War II, and succession orders in 1945 passed the land on to his sisters. Mr. White says the family has been living and farming on the land ever since. But after 2 hearings and 2 appeals, the Māori Land Court has decided the succession orders should never have been made and the original sale to Frederick Waddell was valid. This puzzles Haumoana White.
What has mystified us is that there is a succession order to that land in 1945. And the judges decided that the succession order was an error. I don't believe that the court has the power to overturn a succession order, nor be it a 73-year-old succession order.
Mr White says in 2013 Mr Wetney's name was on the title, and in 2017 it was gone. Russell Gibbs represented the hapu through the court process. In his opinion, the original sale never happened.
I have a fundamental view that a man can't lose his land without being paid for it. Any sales transaction, if they don't pay the money, they don't get the land. And the families never ever got the money, and that's what the evidence in front of the court said.
Mr Gibbs says the transaction was conditional.
The money was held by the Native Land Board pending survey to be completed, which was Wardell's obligation.
And what happened there?
Wardell never surveyed. It's never been surveyed. Money stayed in the Native Land Board.
Angela Potros says her family bought the disputed land along with the neighbouring property in 2003. Mrs Potros says they noticed the anomaly in their paperwork for Te Kawau 5 years later.
When we went to sell it, to pay our debt off to the bank, that block, we couldn't sell it because it didn't have proper title. It had a memorandum of title, but it didn't have its proper title. So that land got left.
Mrs Potros says she then began the process of getting a title for the land, and in 2014 orders were issued determining her ownership. She says Mr Wetney's family had never been paid for the land because he had gone bankrupt and the money was held by the Maori Land Board and used to pay his debts.
The court said because the money had been used to pay Karini Wetney's debts and because of the paper trail, that this was definitely a reason why the money wasn't given to the family. Part of it was, I think there was about a 15 or 14 pounds that was given to the family.
In November last year, the Māori Appellant Court found that on the balance of probabilities, the title did pass to Mr Waddell by 1933. Mrs Potros says she now holds a Māori freehold land title and will still need to survey the block as per the original deal if she intends to sell it. Acting Sergeant Craig O'Doherty says the police were called to the protest at the weekend, but no action was taken because on the day the Potros family were unable to prove their ownership. Mr O'Doherty is hopeful the situation will be resolved later this week. I Taranaki mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martin-Aho.
Let's go to Fiji now, where a clean-up is underway in the west of the country following severe flooding caused by cyclone Josie, which killed 5 people at the weekend. Johnny Blades reports.
Fiji is now grappling with what Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama has called an almost constant level of threat from extreme weather events. Although far from the strongest cyclone to pass Fiji this season, Category 1 cyclone Josie combined with especially high tides to drench the Western Division. The acting principal scientific officer with Fiji's Met Service, Stephen Meke, says it began with a trough that approached from the west on the back of months of heavy rain.
This has been the case for our last flood as well. I think the flood that we had in 2012 and 2009, with a similar situation with the depression then affected us in 2012, caused severe flooding. It came to the west as well, and it was just dumping all these northwesterly rain bands.
Businesses in urban centres like Nandi and Lautoka have sustained extensive damages. So too the agriculture sector, particularly sugarcane farmers, for whom the losses will run into millions of dollars. Meanwhile, the Fiji Red Cross has been assisting with the distribution of government aid. Its Western Division Services Coordinator Matthew Bolai Tamana says acute need for water is widespread among the worst affected communities.
Water is the greatest need there. Government, I understand, has been making ration distributions in these areas. So majority of those that live in these rural areas are cane farmers. So the devastation for them is cane farms, and also their livelihoods has been very drastically affected.
He says affected communities are showing great resilience and haven't waited for government assistance to begin the clean-up. Hundreds of people are in evacuation centres and many schools remain closed, with power, water and road access still being restored in some parts. The National Federation Party's leader, Biman Prasad, says the level of damage is a lot worse than that of previous floods.
The damage that has been caused by this flood is massive, and that's why we are saying that the government should declare the Western Division, particularly areas from Nandi right up to Tavua, as a disaster zone,
and that will allow government to then properly undertake the relief and the rehabilitation efforts that would be required.
Stephen Meke says people in Fiji's low-lying areas should take precautions because the cyclone season has not finished.
I would say after April, because we're expecting another series of blows to come just to the west, just like Josie did. And we're expecting another maybe episode of severe flooding, maybe come early next week.
According to the Prime Minister, the floods are a brutal reminder of the reality of climate change. Frank Bainimarama says Fijians will work together to recover from this latest disaster, but he says a global effort is required to address the root causes of a changing climate which keeps punishing his country. Ko tēnei, Johnny Blades.
The time is coming up to 6 o'clock. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. If you have feedback, text 2101. Let's savour the pips.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission says the new figure of $160 million for re-repairs of quake-damaged homes does not include any cash settlements and is not a final figure. In September 2016, the then Earthquake Recovery Minister Gerry Brownlee said the re-repairs were expected to cost around 60 to 70 million. But information released to Checkpoint shows the figure is already double that. The EQC Minister Megan Wood says the government is liable for those repairs and the work will be becoming more expensive as time goes on.
That is something that frustrates me a lot and something that I have asked EQC to get me the clarity around what is it we could be looking at. There will be some speculation around that, but we need to at least have a ballpark of what it is that is sitting out there and needing re-repair.
Megan Woods, Mr Brownlee hung up on Checkpoint when John Campbell sought to interview him about this. The Transport Minister Phil Twyford says that on average people will be paying less than the price of a cup of coffee each week in extra fuel costs. The government is looking at raising the fuel excise by between 10 and 14 cents a litre as early as next year. The National Party says that would be an unacceptable and unfair burden for motorists, especially those on low incomes. However, Mr Twyford describes the potential rise as a small incremental increase.
It's actually on the low side of the 6 increases that occurred in 9 years under the last National Government. It's going to cost less than the equivalent of a cup of coffee a week.
Transport Minister Phil Twyford. Workers earning the living wage will get a financial boost from today. The unofficial voluntary wage, introduced in 2013, has gone up from $20.20 an hour to $20.55. The national convener of Living Wage Aotearoa, Annie Newman, says the higher rate has been calculated after a review.
It takes into account the Household Economic Survey data from Stats New Zealand, and then it's added this year, which is a bit different, a number of other data sets that have become available, and that includes transport, health and a couple of other things, so that it's really much more closely aligned to what workers need rather than just what they spend.
Annie Newman, the minimum wage was raised 3 days ago to $16.50 an hour. The Taranaki iwi Ngāti Maru has reached an agreement in principle with the Crown for a treaty settlement worth $30 million. It's the last of Taranaki's 8 iwi to settle with the Crown. The chairman of Te Runanga o Ngāti Maru, Holden Hohaia, says the iwi's 2,500 members are now being asked to ratify the settlement. Once that's done, the government will pay half the financial redress immediately.
Continued negotiations might take 6 months, might take 12 months, might take 2 years, and in which time, we would prefer to be having that money in our bank account and invested and working for us.
Holden Hohaia says the cultural redress component of the deal is still under negotiation. The iwi's rohe stretches over vast tracts of northern and eastern Taranaki, but by 1865 it had lost 220,000 hectares of land to illegal confiscation and dubious land sales. A coroner is recommending changes to the way in which pilots apply for medical certificates. The former 2 Degrees chief executive Eric Hertz and his wife Catherine were killed when their light plane crashed into the sea near Kawhia Harbour in March 2013. Logan Church reports.
In a report released today, Coroner Gordon Martenga says the crash was caused by the left engine failing. However, he says at the time of the crash, Mr. Hertz was not fit to fly, as he had been diagnosed with mental illness and was taking a drug that can affect decision-making. His brother, Eli Hertz, has accepted that Eric Hertz lied in his application for a medical certificate. Mr. Martenga is recommending that a GP should be required to fill out part of such applications, or alternatively, fill out a separate questionnaire about the applicant's medical history. Call Logan Church, Chennai.
The Hawke's Bay Regional Council is considering selling a stake in Napier Port or listing it on the NZX in order to raise money to reduce its debt and fund future growth. The port is wholly owned by the council and brings it $10 million a year in income. But the port needs $275 million worth of investment to grow, and the council wants to reduce its stake because of earthquake risk and a desire to diversify into other areas. An advisory panel has recommended either a minority sale or a long-term lease to a third party as the best options. The council will consider all options and hold a special submission process in the middle of the year. It's 6:05. New Zealand para swim coach Simon Mayne says Australian backstrokers will have an advantage over their competitors at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. The swimming will be held in an outdoor pool, meaning backstrokers have no visual guide to help them stay in their lanes. The New Zealand team have been training in another outdoor pool to acclimatise, and Mayne concedes many have been crashing into the lane ropes without roof lines to aid them. He says the Aussies have a huge head start.
They've had it for years, you know, they'll have grown up, learned to swim, and then they go into their mini squads and they go on. So yeah, they've definitely got an advantage for the backstroke.
Simon Mayne. The Central Stags are the new Plunket Shield champions despite needing a big total to secure a win over Northern Districts. A 120-run loss to Wellington Firebirds against the Auckland Aces today means the Stags secured their first Shield win since 2013. And Cristiano Ronaldo scored with a bicycle kick which was outrageous even by his standards to lead Real Madrid to a 3-0 win over Juventus in their Champions League quarter-final first leg tie in Turin. The goal was greeted by applause even from Juventus fans.
Great goal, fantastic. I didn't expect to score that goal, but I think the game was amazing. We scored 3 goals against Juve. A great team. We play nice and great night.
Cristiano Ronaldo. And that's the news.
The safety of high-rise buildings.
The certificates are wrong to claim that these panels comply with the New Zealand Building Code. Not only that, of course, but that the UK testing has shown that the panels fail in a key way.
The safety of roads.
If most New Zealanders had to choose between their loved one dying in a car crash and driving a little bit slower, they would choose the life of their loved one.
And the safety of ministers.
People will make mistakes while I'm in government. What's important is how they correct them, that they correct them as soon as they can.
Join us over coffee. Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, a local council building inspector speaks out about the substandard safety checks on the country's building stock. And after 10, Brett McKenzie on the Muppets, the brilliance of Jim Henson, and working with old schoolmate Nick Marshall. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mainly fine weather. Waitomo to Manawatu, also the central high country, isolated showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine, but areas of cloud later tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, including Wairarapa, fine weather but some cloudy periods and possibly a shower in the Wairarapa. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury mostly fine, however cloudy periods about the Canterbury Plains and Kaikoura coast tomorrow morning with isolated showers. Bulla and Westland, occasional showers clearing overnight. Fiordland, occasional rain, possibly heavy tomorrow night. Otago and Southland, scattered rain retreating to the south coast tomorrow morning and to Stewart Island during the afternoon. Westerly gales easing this afternoon, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the chance of a shower until tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 8:06. You're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas, and thank you everyone for being with us. Earlier in the program, we revealed a $100 million blowout in the cost of re-repairing Christchurch homes. Earthquake damage, of course. Documents released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show $160 million has already been spent on re-repairs. It's 120% more than the 60 to 70 million estimated by the former Earthquake Recovery Minister Gerry Brownlee as an overall cost back in 2016. That figure is money spent thus far and does not include cash settlements, which are becoming more common in Christchurch. The current Minister, Megan Woods, told us earlier in the program the previous government had left her a mess.
Well, I think it's a failure of political management, I think, and leadership. That the minister's responses, the previous minister Gerry Brownlee back in 2016, was to not take this seriously. It was willfully downplaying it and making light of it in some ways. And I didn't think it was acceptable then. And I knew there was a bigger problem when I was the opposition spokesperson, and it gives me absolutely no sense of delight to be proved right here. But everything that I suspected was happening in terms of the volume that was awaiting and just around the corner was there, and I think the previous government needs to take full responsibility for that.
EQC Minister Megan Woods. The former Minister Gerry Brownlee declined to be interviewed. He hung up on me earlier after saying he couldn't recall if or when he knew of the $100 million blowout. National leader Simon Bridges also declined to be interviewed. EQC CEO Sid Miller was unavailable today. We hope to hear from him tomorrow. But Gerry Brownlee's successor, National's new EQC spokesperson, Stuart Smith, who wasn't in Cabinet in the last government, was available. We'll hear from him in a moment. But first, Bridget Burke with the story of those still dealing with botched repairs 7 years on.
Catherine Adair was pregnant in 2011 when the first earthquake struck. The damage to her home was deemed one of EQC's priority cases.
We've had 3 repairs done to this property. We've moved out twice. And we're still in a situation where we have 400 points of defect. The foundations, the walls, the windows, the roof, the brick cladding, the plastering, the planking, the flooring, and none of them are up to trade standards, and we don't have compliance. We have health and safety risks. We have a fire that blows smoke into the room, and it also has air flowing into the room as well, so it's cold and drafty. And it is unusable.
Solo mum Tanya Ashton bought her dream home in 2015, believing it had been repaired by EQC, only to find the repairs had been botched not once but twice, and the contracted builders hadn't re-levelled the home.
I was absolutely petrified and in tears because I bought this house, I had insurance, I've been paying my insurance all my life, and now it's gone over cap. But why has it gone over cap? If the repairs had been done properly the first time, it would be fine.
Tanya is now over cap, meaning her insurer won't pay for the cost to fix her home. She told Conan Young the repairs could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I'd like the houses to be fixed to the level they should have been. If there's dodgy workmanship, those people should be held accountable. The people that didn't do the job properly, they should be held accountable because they've taken money out of my pocket and my children's pocket and made our life a living hell.
Debbie Momo bought her house in Christchurch post-quake knowing it did need some repairs.
There was only meant to be $25,000 worth of damage to the house. We thought, well, EQC had done their job and said it was only facial, cosmetic, so we felt quite safe.
But when they got started, her builder told her the damage was anything but cosmetic.
It didn't take them very long at all to work out that this house should have come down. Really, it was pretty bad.
So it went from being $20,000 worth of cosmetic repairs to what?
A write-off.
Like Tanya, Debbie is now over cap. Her insurer will also not pick up the tab. Botched repairs weren't evident at Mike Stewart and Julia McIntyre's home until they went to sell it.
Well, they asked for the scope of works, which we didn't have. So we went to EQC quickly to try and get a scope of works, and when we got it, they did their engineer's report with the scope of works and went, well, the ring foundation hasn't been replaced. Clearly, it hadn't been replaced. And then when we started looking further, you could see more and more things weren't done.
Mike and Julia's sale fell through. The couple had already bought a new home and their children had moved schools. Mike and Julia now join Tanya and Debbie in limbo.
I said to him, "You're a liar, because if you'd looked under the floor, you would have noted that there is black polythene that we put on the ground under the house prior to the earthquakes."
These homeowners still dealing with botched repairs told Checkpoint when their scope of works were done, nobody ever looked under the floorboards. Now their homes have major structural damage.
And you can't actually see whether there's liquefaction under there unless you climb under the house, lift the black polythene and have a look.
I consequently received a letter saying that he saw only 0.01 cubic metres of silt under the house, and it was costed at $2.05 to remove. My insurance company, as a result of negotiations with my lawyer, put a critter under the house which not only showed a lot of damage, broken bearers, parted bearers, cracks round the foundation, tilted piles, etc., but masses of silt inundation under the house.
It took 3 years and going through 8 different people to finally get an engineer to say that the damage to the foundations was earthquake related.
Nick and her husband invested their life savings buying their first home post-quake. The couple asked the vendor for the scope of works and believes they were purchasing a home that had been EQC fixed.
We believed that the new foundations had gone in, and we were told that it was a jack impact foundation and that it was suitable. It was a suitable repair for the property, and that it was fine.
But things were anything but fine.
We've got photos where the bearer underneath the house doesn't even sit on a pile. The nails aren't connected, and it looks like a third form woodwork project.
Tanya Ashton has this advice for anyone looking to buy a home in Christchurch.
Get a qualified opinion and investigate something chronic. Just make sure. And actually don't even buy one that's been fixed.
That was Bridget Burke putting that package together. The only person available from the National Party to speak to us who was remotely connected to this issue today was Stuart Smith. Stuart Smith is now its EQC spokesperson, although he wasn't in Cabinet when National were in government. I put to him, though, because he would front what Megan Woods told us earlier, that the woes of EQC and the Canterbury Home Repair Program were a result of failed leadership under her predecessor, Gerry Brownlee.
Well, that she would say that, I suppose. Look, the reality is there was 67,000 repairs, most of which were of extremely high quality. What we're talking about here is 2,600 open claims. Some of second and third times they've come back with subsequent owners, as people sell houses and so on. And that's like 3.8% of the repairs. And there's a callback rate in a new build situation of 25%. So on one level, it's not good enough, but on another level, if you look at it compared to new builds, these things happen.
Yes, although we've obtained Official Information Act material that tells us that the total cost of addressing re-repairs, remediation on failed or botched or inadequate repairs has reached $160 million.
Yes, well, I've also said this publicly, that if you can't, contracts are enforceable. If someone hasn't lived up to their contractual obligations, then they really have to be followed through with. My understanding with Fletcher's is that the program, while it's come to an end, any subfloor repairs that they have gone back on, they've actually paid.
Yes, this is the cost to the taxpayer. So this is public money. This is $160 million in remedial work on repairs done under the Canterbury Home Repair Program.
Well, as I said, contracts are enforceable, and if EQC believe that they contracted for a repair that wasn't done correctly, then they should be seeking some reimbursement for that.
So you're saying Fletcher should repay that money?
I'm saying if someone has entered into a contract to supply to a repair to a certain level and that hasn't been achieved, then they have something to answer for. Whether that's, I would imagine, in the long run, the courts would decide.
Are you happy with the quality of the work done under the Canterbury Home Repair Program?
Well, out of 64,400 repairs, yes.
How many callbacks were there from those repairs?
2,600 that we're aware of, that I'm aware of, that are open at the moment. How many of the callbacks overall? I don't have that number, but what I'm saying is it's the callback percentage, is my understanding, is under 4%. And you build a new house across the country, 25% of those new builds have callbacks.
Now, I have a briefing, an EQC briefing. It's an update on callbacks, which in fact went to the Minister in September 2016. So this isn't you, this is your predecessor as Minister. And it is an update on remedial data. And it says there have been 11,000 callbacks. That is a percentage rate of 16.3%. And there is an expectation, and I'm quoting from the EQC document, that that percentage will increase slightly over time as new callbacks are received.
Well, it's still under the 25% as the number that I mentioned. But look, it would be ideal if you didn't have one single callback. That's unlikely to happen. We had an opportunity here to make two choices. Either pay people as was required under the Act, just pay out for the repairs and leave that to the homeowners to manage, or to go through a managed rebuild program. That, of course, was the latter course that we chose to take, or the Minister Brownlee chose to take. If he hadn't done that, then we would be in a situation where a lot of those repairs would have been at least that many, and probably a lot more, would have been callbacks, and there wouldn't have been anyone, in some cases, to come back, because the companies would have most likely wound up and moved on. That was a judgment that the Minister made at the time, that the best way to manage this process was to have a managed repair and get the best outcome for people. Now, some people concerned, but of course, some people have not had a repair up to standard. That isn't good enough, but I go back to the choice that was made by the previous Minister. I believe that was the right one. We would have a far worse outcome had we not. I mean, I remember you calling for faster action night after night on your show. And you got as faster action as we possibly could through a managed repair program. Of course, there are some problems, but I would argue, had we not done that, there would be far more.
Stuart Smith, who is now the EQC spokesperson for the National Party. It's 21 minutes past 6. Courier drivers in Auckland fear they could be forced out of the job if a proposed nationwide tax increase goes ahead. A 10 cent a litre regional fuel tax will come into effect in Auckland in July. On top of that, the government is now looking at increasing excise duty and road user charges by between 9 and 12 cents a litre over the next 3 years. Laura Tupou reports.
Shannon Berridge, the operations manager of Auckland-based company Speedy Couriers, says being a driver isn't a high-paying job.
It's a real up and down industry, so there's times where they live week to week very lean. So yeah, it's going to hurt them, and they will consider going elsewhere. Shannon Berridge says courier drivers are usually contractors, so any increase in fuel prices hits them where it hurts. What will end up happening, I assume, is a few months will go by, and then we'll have to do something about that. So we'll end up having to put our prices up, so that'll hurt our clients. Mr Berridge says about 30 of its 40 drivers live in South Auckland, where there are already many other barriers. And they have big families, a lot of kids to feed and this kind of thing. I see a lot of them struggling, and it is pretty demographic. You know, you have no drivers from Remuera, so yeah, it's going to hurt. It will hurt them. The Otara Papatoetoe local board chair, Lotu Fuli, agrees, saying paying up to 22 cents more per litre at the pump will disproportionately affect families in her South Auckland area.
We've got issues around housing affordability, even when mum and dad are both working, and they tend to be working in lower paid jobs. They just can't afford the high price of living in Auckland, the rent and everything else. But Ms Fuli says when she was consulting on the Auckland regional fuel tax, there was a definite sense of the community wanting to pitch in together, and she believes that will happen again. If everybody pays a little bit, then we can shoulder that burden together. And I think that reflects the culture of our local board area, where we are more communal in the way that we look at the world and the backgrounds that we come from. Lotu Fuli says the increase could have a positive spin-off, encouraging people to use public transport and to walk or cycle.
Down the road, the Mangere o Tahuhu local board chair, Le Maunga Lydia Sosene, says there is acknowledgement from the community that money is needed to improve transport infrastructure. But she says it's a matter of who's deciding how much everyone will pay.
Whether you're paying 10 cents or whether you're paying 22 cents per litre, that's the area of debate. I would be raising and highlighting the deprivation that is within our communities.
The government says the excise increase will be spent on local road improvements, regional roads and increasing road safety and traffic management, and could be introduced as early as next year. The tax is only on petrol, not diesel. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou ho.
It is 24 and a half minutes, almost 24 and a half minutes past 6. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. MPs were told today that medical or medicinal cannabis should be legalised for more people, not just those who are terminally ill and or near death. Parliament's Health Select Committee has begun hearing submissions on what's being described as contentious legislation. Our health correspondent Gerry Brownlee was there, and Karen filed this report.
The bill would allow terminally ill people who have less than a year to live to possess and use medicinal cannabis. The director of the Drug Foundation, Ross Bell, told the committee that those with severe and debilitating conditions need to be protected from prosecution as well.
Only focusing on terminal patients isn't good enough, and in reality, terminal patients aren't getting arrested by the police, but many other patients are. And the way that police use their discretion means that a lot of people are getting prosecuted still.
Ross Bell says those who support terminally ill patients also need legal protection.
The so-called green fairies, people that will be administering the medicine or even cultivating the medicine, you know, and I think, again, you're going to hear stories of people who are on their deathbed or are severely physically limited that they can't access the medicine, they can't even administer the medicine.
The Green MP Chloe Swarbrick, whose more liberal medicinal cannabis bill was voted down by Parliament in February, told MP she wants to see the legislation advance, but not without changes. In particular, because there are gaps if cannabis is made legal for just those who are terminally ill.
That doesn't make medicinal cannabis legal. It doesn't address access. It doesn't address availability. It doesn't address the quality of the product, and it certainly doesn't address affordability. It doesn't even provide a legal way for terminally ill patients to get the medicines that they require.
Ms Swarbrick added that it wasn't good enough not to provide legal protection for cannabis growers.
We're all quite aware of the gaping black hole that presently exists. I'm aware that my bill was evidently voted down because people were concerned about the provision, the so-called grow your own provision. But what we have right here is people still needing to get access to cannabis illegally. Somebody has to grow it.
Shane Lebrun from the Medical Cannabis Awareness New Zealand charity said those most at risk of being prosecuted for illegal cannabis use are not the terminally ill.
I'm quite plugged in with who's getting busted by the police, and it's not terminal patients. There's no one who's 2 months from death door that has the police knocking on their door. So that whole part of the bill was actually toothless.
Shane Lebrun also asked whether others who are very ill but not near death need medicinal cannabis for pain relief.
Are we happy with really sick people to be hauled before the courts for growing something that helps them, especially when the legal options cost thousands of dollars a month?
The College of GPs said doctors want the best for their patients, but clinical trials and MedSafe approval are needed before medicinal cannabis is made more widely available. Asked if those with chronic illnesses should be included, the college president, Tim Malloy, said doctors would struggle with who that would cover.
That's going to be the issue. It's not whether this applies to them or not, it's how do you define it, and what are the criteria, and what do you have to have tried beforehand, and things. So there's a whole body of work that needs to be done to define that for us.
Doctors also told MPs deciding which patients are terminally ill and have just 1 year left to live may also not be easy. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brown tēnei.
Always an issue that gets us lots of feedback, that one, but it's a bit late for feedback on that tonight. We've got lots of feedback on other things. I just watched your interview, John, with Megan Woods on Checkpoint, and would like to add that I never signed off on my EQC repairs, says Debbie. Why? Because they were substandard and I was not happy with them. EQC advised me, if you don't sign it off, we will. So there you go. That's how they get around getting paid by the government. What were the board of EQC doing? Ian asks. Another governance failure. And this from Jean. I was appalled to hear the fact Mr Brownlee had refused to respond to your request for an interview, but even more appalled to hear the way he responded to your phone call. Does this man not realise the position he held in the last government as a minister meant he was the representative spokesman link between government and the citizens of New Zealand who'd voted him into that position of responsibility and hence expected him to be honest and effective? How can such a person refuse to answer questions and then hang up? What level have we sunk to as a country that this is the calibre of people we chose to represent us? At least now he has a much smaller role. Thank you for your feedback on that. Someone accused me of being sanctimonious and said it was no wonder that Gerry Brownlee hung up on me. Lots of you are delighted by Sophie's Gran Yvonne, and someone says that she too is the Christchurch Gran, and from time to time Jan has Sophie lapping alongside her, describes her as a human dolphin. Yeah, that was a magic interview. It's online. Sophie's Gran Yvonne Goodman saying how proud she was of that daughter of hers who lost a leg to a lawnmower aged 2 and is tonight leading the New Zealand team out at the Commonwealth Games. One final piece of feedback. Your attempted interview with Gerry Brownlee basically sums up how we've felt in Christchurch all along, frustrated and cut off. Most of us here have known how the previous government underestimated the scale of the disaster. We appreciate your continued support and we appreciate your feedback. Thank you, lovely to hear from you. That's Checkpoint for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission says the new figure of $160 million for re-repairs of quake-damaged homes in Christchurch is not a final figure. Meanwhile, National Party EQC spokesman Stuart Smith has told Checkpoint most of these 67,000 repairs were high quality and the percentage of callbacks is less than the figure for new builds. New Zealand workers earning the living wage will receive a financial boost, with the figure going up 35 cents to $20.55. And the Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, says that on average people will be paying less than the price of a cup of coffee each week in extra fuel costs when the new fuel taxes come in. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Country Life this week is checking out a Central North Island cycle trail. Has it been a worthwhile investment?
Absolutely. We've done about 3